Hey everybody, it's Charles, your hobby hero, coming at you today with an absolutely ton of meta analytics for you. Before we get started though, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button down in the bottom corner. I do appreciate it. I do put out regular content about the hobbies that I love the most, with this channel being dedicated to the card games that I play. Now, if you are not familiar with the online client of Pixelborn, it is a client that actually allows you to play a rules-enforced version of the game for free online. There are no restrictions to the cards that you can have, so there is no cost prohibitive measures that are in place for people to build and play and test whatever decks they want. They actually just released a ton of data on matchups, and we're going to be reviewing a lot of that information today. Now, I don't want to neglect the fact that there was a large 1K tournament down in Tennessee this weekend as well. However, after kind of reviewing the information that came out of that 1K as far as like deck lists and turnout, I do feel that it's not very representative of the current state of the metagame. The deck choices, a lot of them looked as if they had made a lot of budget decisions. They weren't playing optimized lists, and the attendance was a little low for a game that has as much hype as this one has. So I do feel like it pushed a lot of people away just due to being so early and the product being so slim on the shelves that people just didn't feel confident enough in testing and getting the right 60 plus card list together to go and compete. So if you want that information, I may review it in a future video. However, when we talk about the meta right now, I think this Pixelborn information is going to be the most accurate information we have. This data was collected from over 100,000 matches that were played, which really gives us a very clear picture of what people are trying, what people are being successful with. And make sure you stay tuned for the end of the video, because I'll let you know what my sleeper pick is for the next wave of this current meta. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. Pixelborn has actually released their data from the games that they have collected. Over 100,000 matches were recorded for this data, which is absolutely awesome amount of data to look at. These are going to be representative of the top 5 decks amongst all of those games that were collected. So we have, no surprise, Ruby Amethyst leading the charts at 28.6% of the top 5 meta. Amber Emerald coming in next at 22.2% of that meta. This is actually the deck that I am currently kind of climbing and playing in paper form. So I've been very happy with that deck as well. We've got Amber Amethyst here, which is kind of a deck we'll be doing a profile on here probably in the next week or so. It's a very high roll deck. If it gets the draws that it needs, it is absolutely a monster to take care of when it is being played. But it does have a lot of weaknesses, most specifically steel. And if it misses some of the cards that it needs to hit, then it really doesn't have a second way to win. But we'll be breaking that down a little bit more going forward. We've got the Sapphire and Steel deck here. Now, we don't know the exact list for any of these builds, just these color combinations. The most prevalent ones in the Sapphire Steel decks are going to be your Bell into Whole New World, kind of control late game type decks for the Sapphire and Steel builds. And then finally, we've got Amber and Steel here. The Amber Steel decks are pretty fun. We've got the 3-drop Aerial that can go and get your Whole New World or your Grab Your Swords and be able to sing it on turn 4, which is very nice in those aggro matchups. Fun deck to play. Again, color combination is generally going to revolve around early rush characters and then being able to slow your opponent down with targeted removal and cards like Grab Your Swords. Now, if we look at the breakdown of their win rates for these decks, this is kind of where the first piece of surprising data comes in. We've got Ruby Amethyst as our top presentation in those lists, but one of our worst performing win rates. I think it's 4th on the win rate here, with only the Sapphire and Steel deck coming in below it. And our least represented one out of the top 5, our Amber and Steel deck here at a 50.31% win rate, which is our highest win rate actually on this list. So you got some surprises there. None of these decks are above 50%. And I don't want you to think that that means all these decks you're on average going to lose. When you're taking data from a very large sample size like this, you've got to imagine like this is a true average. If you're a better than average player, you're going to be above this mark. If you're a below average player, you're going to be below this mark. What we can see though is that with this data here, the like tier 0 format that a lot of people have been talking about in regards to Ruby Amethyst, or it's the only S tier deck that we have, we can see that the numbers really don't support that. The level and skill of a player behind this deck may make it a better deck than some other ones, but in general, it is not a deck that is so powerful that it is just pulling itself ahead, and regardless of the competition it's running into. Now, I do want to look at some of the highest win rate decks that we have overall. Now, before we break these down, put the caveat here, like the sample size of 100,000 is very large. His criteria to make this list was only combinations that had logged 200 games or more. And I know especially for these first 3, they had logged very few games. I think like sub 3,000 matches total, compared to like Ruby Amethyst, which is logged like almost 30,000. So let's take that into consideration. The top 3 here are not common color combinations, do not get played often, and as such, probably aren't the best representations of their actual win rate if they were more prevalent. So don't rush out to take Ruby Amber to a high level tournament. I absolutely encourage building with it. Clearly, it has the potential to win, but these win rates, especially on these top 3, are not as representative as the win rates that we saw on those top decks, just because they're not there. Now, we have seen Amethyst and Steel and Amber and Steel pretty well represented, so these numbers are probably a little closer to their actual representation of win rates. Now, I know what you're thinking at this point. You're like, okay, we can look at these stats, but, it's overall players. There's lots of new players, casual games, people still playing starter decks, et cetera, on Pixelborn. Now, Pixelborn actually did log the data for games that only included at least one person in the top 100 as well. So we can take a look at those stats as well. Total games played by the top 100. Ruby Amethyst, again, an overwhelming favorite in this category at 35.5%, even higher than the general public's. And I think a lot of that is, this is a harder deck to pilot. It's also a long game to play. So I think you're only going to find more competitive people willing and able to play a deck like this, which probably explains why it's a higher percentage in that top 100 field. Amber Emerald, again, coming in second in that category. I think the Amber Emerald deck counters the Ruby Amethyst deck very well, which is probably a big reason why it's still so prevalent in that format. We do have Amber and Steel moving up from the last spot in the top 5 in the general accumulated numbers to the 3rd overall deck. And again, I think it counters Amber and Emerald very well, which is probably why it is going on with kind of your rock, paper, scissor in these top 3. The Sapphire Amber, I have not seen a really competitive list with this color combination. If you've got one, let me know down below. I'd love to take a look at it. It is representative of about 12.5% just about in the top 100 players, so I would be interested to see what those lists look like. And then rounding out the top 5, we've got Amethyst and Steel. Very similar to the Ruby Amethyst decks, obviously replacing the Ruby in there with the Steel for kind of a better matchup versus your early game. We'll take a look at the win rates of these same decks in that top 100. Again, Ruby Amethyst surprisingly underperformed, 4th overall in this one. It's actually worse in the hands of the top 100 players than it is performing in the general population's numbers, which was also surprising to me because I know a lot of the people who consider themselves to be very competitive and wanting to push the competitive envelope have been heralding this deck. So I know there's some really good pilots behind it. So I was surprised to see that even in the top 100 that its win rate was not above 50% and was actually lower in the hands of these top pilots. Amber and Emerald actually increases their win rate to almost a 51% win rate in the hands of the top 100. Amber and Steel coming in at 49.21%. The Amber Sapphire lists a whopping 52.9%. Again, the lists here are obviously performing in those matchups. Now, I will say these bottom two, again, had a fraction of the games recorded that these top ones really did. I think almost like 700 total matches for the Amber Sapphire decks here. So we could just have a really, really good pilot playing a whole lot of games with this color combination. Not sure. Again, would love to check out some lists there. And then Amethyst Steel rounding out our top 5 at 48.34. Now our overall win rate of the top decks, I will say this one is even less probably accurate than the other top win rate, because the only criteria for this one was they had to log 50 or more matches with a member of the top 100. And I don't know very many. As you can see, Ruby is all over this list. I don't know a ton of Ruby lists out there outside of Amethyst and possibly some Sapphire Ramp. But you can see some very high win rates here. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they are just very low numbers of actual games logged at this point. But you can see some color combinations again that you may not have experienced having some success even in games against the top 100 with a whopping almost 54% win rate on a Ruby Steel list, which again, I have not seen a strong Ruby Steel list up to this point. Start with our characters here. We've got Archimedes at a 4 of, as well as Captain Hook at a 4 of. These are our 1-drops here. This is kind of how we start off our rush kind of countermeasures if they're playing aggro. Captain Hook is very nice as he trades even into a Simba if they play the Simba down. And the Archimedes can help challenge the follow-up character behind it, both inkable in case we are not playing that aggro matchup. And just keep in mind to not play extra characters down if you're not playing the aggro matchups. You're going to need these for ink, and the amount of lore they generate in control matchup is pretty inconsequential. So just keep that in mind whenever you're playing and testing the deck. Our 1/2 drop is Prince Eric. He's kind of the follow-up to Captain Hook here. At 3 toughness, he actually survives the Simba challenge, and hopefully kind of pull at least 1 attack afterwards in regards to that. Elsa here, she is our target for the 8 drop to shift into. Helps us get the 8 drop down on turn 6, which is very nice versus the control mirror to have that option to come down sooner. She also has some abilities some synergy with her exert ability and being able to challenge in with like our Tinkerbells and our Rafikis. So don't ignore the fact that she does have this freeze ability. But ultimately, she is in here to kind of get the jump on the control decks by being able to get our Elsa down before theirs. Maleficent at a 4 of, kind of self-explanatory. She comes in, she draws a card. She can also sing Friends on the Other Side, which is very nice as well. Trades pretty favorably with the early 1 and 2 drops as well. Rafiki is an absolute beast against our aggro matchups, almost always being a 2-for-1. Absolutely must-have card against the aggro meta when you're playing against that. It is unfortunate that he's uninkable because his uses are pretty limited in the control matchups that you face. But unfortunately, like, he is a necessary evil in a meta where control or aggro is present, and it very much is right now. Now, Tinkerbell here, she is inkable and a lot of times will stay inkable. She's obviously in here to let us hit our big Tinkerbell a couple turns earlier, having her come down on turn 4 with the ability to quest or challenge that turn is huge and definitely worth the inclusion. Once we get up to a high enough ink, she just becomes more ink as well. She can help us dig a little bit as well. If we end up with a bunch of uninkable cards in our hand against the control matchup, don't hesitate to use her to draw a card and discard one of those uninkable cards that's just not going to be good anymore for the remainder of the match. We have Hans here. Hans is a very strong card in play, inkable as well. 2 lore generators will help put some space in between you and others. He also kind of prevents the aggro rush by being able to pick off characters and finish off characters without actually having to challenge them. 3/3 is a little understated as a 4-drop, but generally you're not going to care because this ability is going to want you to quest with him more so than challenge anyways. So just a very nice all-around card for Steel. We got 2 copies of the Queen. If you've played Amethyst, you kind of know what her inclusion is. In the control matchups, being able to draw a card every turn or draw a removal spell out of their hand is very, very good. Beast, again, is here for that control matchup. Again, in a 2 of being able to break their control items, either the Mirror or Ursula's Cauldron. Makes this card a very, very nice addition in those mirrors. 2 lore generating, 4/4 body is not terrible either at 5. Very big fan of this card when you see him in those matchups. And then in the aggro matchups, you're just going to pitch him for the ink anyways. Talking about our bombs now, our late game cards. We have Tinkerbell at 6. You can shift into her at 4. She has the ability to come in and rock the boat. She deals 1 damage to all of your opponent's characters when she comes in, which will, more often than you realize, kill several characters in and of itself. She also has the ability Puny Pirate. When she challenges and banishes a character in that challenge, she gets to do another 2 damage to another character that they control. Now, this ability does not get past ward, so just keep that in mind if you're going to try to pick off a character that has ward. You cannot target it with that additional 2 damage. However, she can get those pesky evasive characters pretty well when she comes in, and she can challenge a character. She can deal 3 damage effectively to their evasives. We've got Ursula at a 4 of. Now, I don't really like Ursula in the traditional Ruby Amethyst list. I think the Maleficent, 9-drop Maleficent, and the 8-drop Mickey are better late game options. Obviously, in this color, we don't have access to those options, with Steel's bigger drops being Gantu and Maui, which are not any good. So we max out our Ursula here, again, as a 4 of. And our top end, she can come in. She steals 1 lore, which can make a difference from time to time, depending on if your opponent had gotten right up to 17 and thrown out their Cusco. You can throw off their math by playing her and being able to prevent them from winning. She does have a very high willpower. Unfortunately, she also has a very low strength, which does not really allow her to trade favorably, but does make it hard for them to take care of her in 1 attack. And she is a 3 lore generating body. We then have Elsa as a 4 of. Again, self-explanatory if you've been playing at all why she's included. She's got a very nice stat line for late game. She can shift 6 coming down, and this deep freeze takes care of a lot of problems for this deck. It not only taps those characters down, making them vulnerable to being challenged, it keeps them exerted the following turn, which means they will not ready and will not be able to quest if you are trying to catch up or prevent them from winning by getting the final little bit of lore that they have. 3 lore generator is also not shabby at all. Friends on the Other Side is our first song of the list here. 3-drop, draw 2 cards that can be sung. This card is basically an auto-include in any Amethyst deck. There's really not much to explain here. It is a +1 card at the cost of 3 or potentially free. So just an amazing card for Amethyst. Grab your swords, another 4 of in this deck. This is kind of the push that this control deck really needed, was a way to take care of those really offensive like aggro decks that are out there. Most of them can either rush enough to defeat the opponent before they get to 7, or disrupt the opponent enough before they get to 7, or just be within striking range to where they can just top deck after 7 and keep putting enough pressure on to make it hard to recover. This card answers that problem by taking them out on turn 5, sometimes even turn 4, depending on your draws. And it is just an absolute blowout of a card. Very often, 3 or more for 1. Just a fantastic card for Steel. Brings us to our items. I've got them as a 2-2 right now between Magic Mirror and Ursula's Cauldron. If I'm being honest, I'm actually a bigger fan of the Ursula's Cauldron in this build than I am the Magic Mirror. Very often, this deck has enough tempo plays early on that I don't want to spend 4 to draw a card. I'd much rather just have the 2 down there and filtering the better draws turn in and turn out. All right, guys, so there you have it. That is the combined information of over 100,000 games that has been collected. Hopefully dissected well enough for you guys to use that in your deck building ventures going forward. Let me know what you guys think of my secret tech deck list as well down in the comment section below. And until next time, guys, Hobby Hero out.